Claire's hands were shaking so badly that she dropped her phone on the kitchen floor. The screen cracked, but she did not care. She had just read a message that was never meant for her eyes, a message that changed everything she believed about her life. It was 2 weeks before her wedding. The dress was already hanging in the closet, wrapped in white plastic. The flowers were ordered. The hall was booked. And now, standing barefoot on the cold tile, Claire stared at her broken phone screen and felt her whole future crack along with it. The message was from Daniel, her fiancé of 3 years. It was not addressed to her. It was addressed to Meredith, her best friend since they were both 8 years old, the girl who had cried at Claire's grandmother's funeral harder than Claire herself had, the woman who had promised to stand beside her at the altar as her maid of honor. The message said something simple, something that should have meant nothing, except that it was signed with 3 words Daniel had never once said to Claire in the same tone. It said, "I love you too, always." Claire picked up the phone with trembling fingers and pressed the screen against her chest, as if she could stop her own heart from breaking through sheer pressure. She told herself there had to be an explanation. Daniel was careful, methodical, the kind of man who color-coded his calendar and never forgot an anniversary. He was not the kind of man who would betray her. And Meredith, sweet, weepy Meredith, who apologized for taking up too much space in a room, who cried during dog food commercials, could never do something so cruel. But the message was right there in front of her. Claire sat down on the kitchen floor because her legs no longer felt strong enough to hold her. She thought about calling Daniel immediately, confronting him with the truth glowing on the screen. But something held her back, some quiet voice, telling her to wait, to watch, to understand the full shape of what was happening before she said a single word. She thought about the past few months. Now that she looked back, small things began to line up like dominoes. Daniel had been working late more often. Meredith had started showing up at Claire's apartment unannounced, always with tears in her eyes, always with some emotional crisis that needed Claire's full attention. There had been the time Meredith called at midnight, sobbing about a breakup, and Daniel had gone to comfort her because Claire had an early shift the next morning. There had been the wedding dress shopping trip where Meredith cried through the entire fitting, saying she was so happy for Claire, so overwhelmed with joy, and Claire had spent 20 minutes comforting her friend instead of admiring her own dress. Claire had always thought Meredith's tears were a sign of a soft heart. Now she wondered if they were something else entirely, a performance, a tool. She stood up slowly, placed the broken phone on the counter, and walked to the bathroom to splash cold water on her face. She looked into the mirror and saw a woman who did not yet know how deep this went, a woman who still had hope that this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, anything other than betrayal. That hope would not last. The next morning, Claire acted as though nothing had changed. She made coffee for herself and Daniel, kissed him goodbye at the door, and watched him drive away to work. Then she opened her laptop and began to search, quietly, carefully, the way a detective might search for evidence in a case that mattered more than any other case in the world. She found messages going back 4 months. She found photographs Daniel had saved in a hidden folder, pictures of Meredith laughing at a restaurant Claire had never been taken to, pictures of the 2 of them at a lake house that belonged to Meredith's family, a lake house Claire had heard about, but had never been invited to visit. She found a receipt for a necklace. Expensive, delicate, gold, purchased the same week Daniel had told Claire he was too busy with work travel to help pick out wedding invitations. Her stomach turned. She felt sick in a way that had nothing to do with food. But there was something else in the messages, something that confused her even more than the affair itself. Meredith had written to Daniel about a plan involving Claire's job. Claire worked as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized company downtown, a job she loved, a job that had taken her 5 years to build into something stable and respected. In one message, Meredith wrote that she had a contact at a company in another state, a company that was hiring for a similar position, and that if Claire took the job, everything would be easier. Daniel had replied with a single word: perfect. Claire read the sentence 3 times before she understood what she was looking at. This was not simply an affair. This was a plan to remove her, to send her far away, to make her someone else's problem, in a city where she knew no one, so that Daniel and Meredith could build their life together, without guilt weighing on them every single day. She closed the laptop and sat in silence for a long time. Her first instinct was to call her mother, but her mother was traveling and hard to reach for the next few days. Her second instinct was to call her older sister, Grace, who lived 2 hours away and had always been the practical one in the family, the one who saw through people faster than anyone else Claire knew. Grace answered on the second ring. Claire tried to speak but found that no words would come out, only a strange broken sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "Claire? Claire, what happened?" Grace's voice sharpened immediately, the way it always did when something was wrong. It took several minutes for Claire to explain everything: the message, the photographs, the plan to send her away for a job in another state. Grace was quiet on the other end of the line, and Claire could picture her sister's face, the way her jaw would be clenched, the way her eyes would have gone cold and focused. "Do not confront them yet," Grace finally said. "Not until you know everything. If they know you have found out, they will change their plan, and you will lose whatever advantage you have right now." Claire wanted to argue, wanted to scream at Daniel the moment he walked through the door that evening, wanted to throw the ring at his feet and demand answers. But some part of her knew that Grace was right. If Meredith could cry on command and manipulate a room so easily, she could also cover her tracks just as easily if given the chance. "What do I do then?" Claire asked, her voice small. "You watch. You collect everything, and you find out exactly how deep this goes before you make a single move." That evening, Daniel came home carrying a bouquet of flowers, an unusual gesture for a man who typically forgot such things unless reminded. He kissed Claire on the cheek and told her he loved her, and Claire smiled and thanked him for the flowers, feeling as though she were watching herself perform a role in someone else's play. Over dinner, Daniel mentioned, almost casually, that Meredith had heard about an incredible job opportunity that might be perfect for Claire. A marketing director position, higher salary, better title, located 3 states away. He suggested Claire at least look into it, just to see what was out there, just to consider all her options before settling into married life. Claire kept her face calm and her voice light as she said she would think about it. Inside, she felt something harden, something cold and steady, replacing the panic from the day before. She understood now that she was not simply the victim of an affair. She was a piece, being moved on a board by 2 people who believed she was too trusting, too soft, too much in love to ever notice what they were doing. They were wrong. Later that night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, Claire lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every soft cry Meredith had ever produced in front of her, every fake tear that had won sympathy instead of suspicion. She thought about the years of friendship, the sleepovers, the secrets shared under blankets as teenagers, the promise they had made to be maid of honor at each other's weddings. All of it now felt like a long, patient setup for this exact moment, though Claire could not yet know how far back the plan truly went. She thought of one more thing before sleep finally took her, exhausted from grief and fear and fury all tangled together. She thought that whatever Meredith and Daniel believed about her, whatever picture they had painted of a woman too naive to notice her own unraveling, she would prove them wrong. She would watch, and she would wait, and when the moment came, she would make sure the truth landed exactly where it needed to land, in front of everyone who mattered. The wedding was in 2 weeks. Claire intended to be ready long before then. The next few days passed in a strange, tense quiet. Claire went to work as usual, smiled at her coworkers, answered emails, attended meetings, and gave no sign of the storm building inside her. At home, she continued to play the part of a happy bride-to-be, discussing seating charts and flower arrangements with Daniel, as though her heart were not slowly turning to stone with every conversation. Meredith visited twice that week, each time arriving with red eyes and a story about some new crisis in her life, a fight with her mother, a problem at work, a fear that she was not good enough for anyone who might love her. Claire listened, nodded, offered comfort, and studied her best friend's face more closely than she ever had before. She noticed things she had never noticed, the way Meredith's tears never actually fell, pooling instead at the edge of her lashes, held in perfect suspension for exactly as long as necessary to draw sympathy. The way her voice would crack at precisely the moment someone might have interrupted to ask a difficult question. The way, When Daniel entered the room, Meredith's crying would soften into something quieter, more private, almost intimate, a performance meant for an audience of one. Claire began keeping notes. She wrote down dates, times, conversations, small details that seemed insignificant on their own, but painted a larger picture when placed side by side. She saved screenshots of messages she found on Daniel's laptop when he stepped away to shower. She photographed receipts left carelessly in his jacket pockets. She built, piece by piece, a case against the two people she had trusted most in the world. Grace called every evening to check on her, offering guidance, reminding her to stay calm, to keep her composure no matter how much it hurt. "They think you are weak," Grace said one night. "Let them keep thinking that. It is the only advantage you have." Claire agreed, though some nights, the pain was so sharp she could barely breathe. She would lock herself in the bathroom, run the shower to hide the sound, and cry until her body ached. Then she would wash her face, straighten her shoulders, and walk back out into a life that no longer felt like her own. By the end of the week, Claire had learned two more things that turned her stomach even further. First, she discovered that Meredith had already been in contact with a real estate agent in the city where the job opportunity was located, inquiring about apartments, as though Claire's move were already a settled matter, rather than a choice she had never made. Second, she found a message from Daniel to Meredith that mentioned a date, the date exactly 1 week after the wedding, a date that Meredith had circled on a calendar Claire found tucked inside a drawer at Daniel's apartment during a visit to collect some of his belongings. Claire did not yet know what significance that date held, but she intended to find out. She sat alone in her car outside her apartment building that night, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead at nothing. The city lights blurred through unshed tears, and for the first time since discovering the message on her phone, Claire allowed herself to fully feel the weight of what was happening to her. Her best friend and her fiancé, the two people she trusted with her whole heart, were building a life together behind her back, while planning to erase her from the picture entirely, sending her away under the guise of opportunity, leaving her isolated and unaware of what she had truly lost until it was far too late to fight back. But Claire was not going to let that happen. She wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and made a promise to herself in the quiet of that parked car. She would uncover every piece of this plan, every lie, every hidden meeting, every secret conversation. And when she had enough, when the picture was complete and undeniable, she would bring it all crashing down in front of everyone who needed to see it. The wedding was still 2 weeks away. Claire had every intention of making sure it never happened, at least not in the way Daniel and Meredith had planned. Grace arrived at Claire's apartment on Saturday morning, with a bag of coffee and a notebook of her own, ready to help her sister build a complete picture of everything Daniel and Meredith had been planning. The two sisters sat at the kitchen table, spreading out printed screenshots, receipts, and handwritten notes like detectives working an important case. "We need dates," Grace said, tapping her pen against the table. "Everything needs a date attached to it. When did the messages start? When did the affair likely begin? When did this job opportunity first come up? If we can build a timeline, we can understand exactly how long this has been going on, and that will tell us how deep the deception runs." Claire nodded, grateful for her sister's steady presence. Grace had always been the calm one, the one who thought in straight lines while Claire's mind tended to spiral into emotion first and logic second. Together, they began piecing together the timeline. The earliest suspicious message Claire could find was from 5 months earlier, a simple text from Meredith to Daniel that read only, "I miss talking to you like this." At the time, it would have seemed innocent, a friend reaching out to a friend. Now, knowing what came after, it read like the opening line of something far more calculated. From there, the messages grew warmer, longer, more frequent. By month 3, Daniel and Meredith were exchanging messages daily, sometimes multiple times a day, always carefully timed for moments when Claire was likely to be busy or asleep. Grace pointed out that the pattern suggested real planning, not a sudden emotional slip. This was not two people accidentally falling into something they regretted. This was two people building a relationship with intention, while using Claire's trust as cover. "There is something else," Claire said quietly, pulling out her phone. She showed Grace a message she had found the night before. one she had somehow missed in her earlier search. It was from Meredith to a woman named Sophie, someone Claire vaguely recognized as a coworker of Meredith's. The message read, "Once the wedding falls apart and she moves for the job, everyone will just think it was bad timing. No one will ever know we planned it." Grace's face went pale as she read the words twice. "This is not just an affair," she said slowly. "This is coordinated. She is not just betraying you emotionally, she is actively working to control how everyone perceives the outcome. She wants people to feel sorry for you, not suspicious of her." Claire felt her stomach twist. The full scope of the plan was becoming clear. Meredith intended to play the role of grieving best friend, once the truth eventually came out, in whatever form she allowed it to surface, likely long after Claire had already moved away for the job, already lost her support system, already become someone easy to dismiss as bitter or confused. Meredith would cry, as she always did, and people would comfort her, and Daniel would stand beside her, and Claire would be alone in a new city with no one to turn to. "She has thought of everything," Claire whispered. "Not everything," Grace said firmly. "She has not thought of you finding out early. That is her mistake, and it is the only mistake we need." They spent the rest of the afternoon organizing everything into a single folder, backed up in 3 different places in case anything happened to Claire's devices. Grace suggested Claire also speak with a lawyer, not necessarily to take legal action yet, but to understand her rights regarding the apartment lease, which was in both her and Daniel's names, and any shared financial accounts that might need to be protected before the situation became public. Claire made the appointment for the following Monday. That evening, Daniel returned from what he claimed was a work dinner, smelling faintly of a perfume Claire did not recognize as her own. She said nothing, only greeted him with the same practiced calm she had maintained all week. He seemed slightly on edge, checking his phone more frequently than usual, stepping into the bedroom to take a call he said was from a client. Claire pressed her ear near the door, careful not to be seen. She could not make out full sentences, but she heard Meredith's name mentioned twice, along with the word soon. Soon, the word echoed in Claire's mind, long after Daniel emerged from the bedroom, smiling, asking what she wanted for dinner, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. The following day at work, Claire found it difficult to concentrate. Her manager, a kind woman named Diane, noticed the change in her and asked if everything was all right. Claire nearly broke down right there in the office, but she held herself together, saying only that wedding planning had been more stressful than expected. Diane offered sympathy and told her to take the afternoon off if she needed it, which Claire gratefully accepted. She used the free hours to visit the lawyer Grace had recommended, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Karen, who listened to Claire's situation with an expression of quiet, controlled anger. Karen explained that because the lease was in both names, Claire had every right to remain in the apartment regardless of what happened with the engagement. She also advised Claire to open a separate bank account immediately and to begin moving her personal savings out of any joint accounts before Daniel had the chance to act first. People who plan this far ahead in one area of their life often plan ahead in others, Karen warned. Protect yourself financially before you protect yourself emotionally. The emotional side will heal in time. The financial side can follow you for years if you are not careful. Claire took the advice seriously. By the end of the day, she had opened a new account and quietly transferred her savings, careful to leave enough in the joint account that Daniel would not immediately notice anything unusual. That night, she received an unexpected call from Meredith, who was crying, as always, claiming she needed to talk, that something was weighing heavily on her heart and she did not know who else to turn to. Claire almost laughed at the absurdity of it, the audacity of her best friend calling to seek comfort from the very person she was betraying. But she answered calmly, agreeing to meet for coffee the next morning, curious to see how far Meredith's performance would go now that the wedding was drawing closer. They met at a small cafe near Meredith's apartment, the same cafe where they had celebrated countless birthdays and breakups over the years. Meredith arrived already teary-eyed, clutching a tissue, apologizing for being so emotional lately. "I just feel like something is wrong," Meredith said, dabbing at her eyes. "Like something bad is coming, and I do not know what it is, and it scares me." Claire studied her friend's face carefully, searching for any sign of genuine guilt beneath the performance. She found none. Meredith's eyes were practiced, her voice carefully modulated, her body language calculated to invite comfort rather than suspicion. "Maybe you are just anxious about the wedding," Claire offered, keeping her tone light. "Weddings can bring up a lot of feelings for everyone close to the couple." Meredith nodded quickly, perhaps too quickly, and changed the subject to the job opportunity she had mentioned before, pressing Claire gently about whether she had looked into the position yet. Claire said she was still thinking it over, watching as something flickered behind Meredith's eyes, something that looked almost like impatience, before it was quickly hidden behind another soft, worried expression. "You deserve something bigger than what you have here," Meredith said, reaching across the table to squeeze Claire's hand. "I just want the best for you. You know that, right?" Claire forced a smile and squeezed back. "I know," she said, though the words tasted bitter in her mouth. As they said their goodbyes outside the cafe, Meredith pulled Claire into a tight hug, holding on slightly longer than usual. Over her friend's shoulder, Claire caught sight of a message notification lighting up Meredith's phone screen, visible for only a second before the screen went dark again. It was from Daniel. The preview read, "Almost there, just a little longer." Claire's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral as they pulled apart. She wished Meredith well, told her to feel better, and walked back to her car with her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Almost there, just a little longer." The words repeated over and over in her mind as she drove home, turning them over, trying to understand what deadline they might be referring to. She thought again of the circled date on Daniel's calendar, 1 week after the wedding, and wondered if that date marked something more specific than she had originally assumed, something perhaps related to the job offer, or the apartment Meredith had been inquiring about, or something else entirely that Claire had not yet uncovered. She called Grace as soon as she arrived home, relaying everything that had happened at the cafe. Grace listened carefully, then suggested something that made Claire's stomach flip with nervous energy. "I think it is time to find out exactly what Meredith is telling other people," Grace said. "Not just what she says to you, or to Daniel, but what she is telling your mutual friends. If she is preparing to play the victim once this comes out, she is probably already planting seeds among the people who will matter most when the truth finally surfaces." Claire agreed, though the thought of investigating her own social circle for signs of manipulation felt exhausting beyond measure. Still, she understood the importance of knowing exactly how far Meredith's influence had already spread, and how many people might already be primed to see Claire as unstable, ungrateful, or difficult, rather than as the woman who had been genuinely betrayed. That night, unable to sleep, Claire opened her laptop and began quietly reaching out to a few close mutual friends, framing her questions carefully, asking innocent-sounding things about recent conversations, recent gatherings, anything that might reveal whether Meredith had been talking about her behind her back. One friend, a woman named Amanda, who had known both Claire and Meredith since college, responded almost immediately with something that made Claire's chest tighten painfully. "I probably shouldn't say anything," Amanda wrote, "but Meredith mentioned last week that she was worried about you. Said you had been acting really overwhelmed and paranoid lately. She said she was scared you might be having some kind of breakdown before the wedding. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now that you're asking, it seemed like a strange thing to bring up out of nowhere." Claire stared at the message for a long time before typing a careful, measured reply, thanking Amanda for her honesty and asking her to keep their conversation private for now. She closed her laptop and sat in the dark, feeling the full weight of Meredith's plan settling over her like a heavy blanket. Meredith was not simply preparing an exit strategy. She was actively building a narrative in which Claire would appear unstable and unreliable, a narrative that would make it easier for people to believe whatever story Meredith and Daniel eventually told about the end of the engagement, and easier still to dismiss any accusations Claire might make once the truth came out on Meredith's terms rather than her own. Claire understood now, with painful clarity, that she was not just fighting to expose an affair. She was fighting to protect her own credibility, her own reputation, her own place within the community of friends and family who had known her for years. If she moved too quickly, too emotionally, she risked confirming exactly the narrative Meredith was already building. She needed to be patient. She needed to be smart. And above all, she needed proof so undeniable that no amount of tears or manipulation could talk her way around it. She thought again of the lawyer's advice from earlier that day, the reminder to protect herself before anything else. Financially, she had already begun. Now she needed to protect herself socially and emotionally as well, building her own quiet network of allies, who knew the truth before Meredith had the chance to poison the well any further. She picked up her phone and began composing a careful message to her mother, finally ready to explain everything that had happened over the past week, knowing that she would need every ally she could gather before this was over. Claire's mother, a steady woman named Ellen who had raised both her daughters alone after their father passed away, called within minutes of reading Claire's message. Her voice was calm but firm, the voice of a woman who had weathered many storms and refused to be shaken by another one. "I am coming to stay with you," Ellen said, before Claire could even finish explaining everything. "You should not be alone in that apartment with him. Not now. Not while you are gathering everything you need. I will be there tomorrow." Claire tried to protest, insisting she could handle things on her own, but her mother would not be moved. By the following afternoon, Ellen had arrived with a suitcase and a determined expression, settling into the guest room as though she intended to stay for as long as necessary. Having her mother nearby brought Claire a strange sense of comfort, even as the situation around her grew more tense. Daniel seemed unsettled by Ellen's sudden presence, offering polite but stiff greetings whenever their paths crossed in the apartment. He mentioned once, almost too casually, that he had a work trip coming up the following week, a conference in another city that would require him to be away for several days. Claire recognized immediately that this trip likely had nothing to do with work. She waited until Daniel left for the office the next morning before quietly searching through his email account, which she still had access to from helping him set up a shared calendar months earlier. She found the confirmation for a hotel reservation, 2 rooms initially, later modified to just 1, located in the same city as the job Meredith had been pushing her toward. The pieces continued falling into place with sickening clarity. Daniel and Meredith intended to travel together under the guise of separate reasons, likely to scout the city further, perhaps to look at apartments together, perhaps simply to spend time as a couple without the constant risk of being seen by anyone who knew Claire. The trip was scheduled for the same week as Claire's wedding shower, an event Meredith had insisted on organizing personally, telling Claire repeatedly how important it was to her to make the day special. Claire wondered, with a bitter twist of understanding, whether Meredith intended to use the shower as a distraction, ensuring Claire's attention and the attention of their mutual friends would be entirely focused elsewhere, while she and Daniel disappeared together under separate excuses. She shared this discovery with Grace and Ellen that evening, and the 3 women sat together at the kitchen table, working through the growing pile of evidence with the focus of a small, determined team preparing for battle. "We need photographic proof of them together," Grace said. "Everything we have so far is messages and receipts. It is damning, but people can always claim messages were taken out of context, or that receipts prove nothing definitive. We need something undeniable, something visual." Ellen agreed, suggesting that Claire hire a private investigator for the week of the supposed conference trip, someone who could document Daniel and Meredith together without either of them realizing they were being watched. Claire felt a pang of guilt at the idea, some old instinct telling her this was excessive, paranoid even. But she pushed the feeling aside, remembering the message about her own supposed instability that Meredith had been spreading among their friends. If Meredith was willing to build a false narrative to protect herself, Claire was willing to gather whatever proof was necessary to dismantle it. The following days passed in a blur of quiet preparation. Claire continued attending work, continued smiling through conversations about wedding details with people who had no idea the wedding was likely never going to happen, continued playing her part in the elaborate performance Daniel and Meredith believed she was still unaware of. Meredith called or texted almost daily, her messages growing increasingly affectionate, almost desperate in their insistence on maintaining closeness. Claire wondered if some part of Meredith felt the pressure of the approaching deadline, whatever it was, and needed reassurance that their friendship, however false it had become, remained intact until the moment came to abandon it entirely. One evening, Meredith showed up unannounced at Claire's apartment, tears already streaming, insisting she needed to talk immediately. Ellen answered the door, her expression carefully neutral despite everything she now knew, and invited Meredith inside. Claire emerged from the bedroom, feigning surprise, and sat across from her supposed best friend in the living room, while Ellen retreated to the kitchen, close enough to listen without being seen. "I do not know how to say this," Meredith began, twisting a tissue between her fingers. "But I think you should really consider that job. I talked to my contact again, and they said the position will not stay open much longer. I just feel like this could be such an amazing opportunity for you, and I would hate for you to miss it, because you were too focused on the wedding to think about your own future." Claire studied her friend's face, noting the careful arrangement of concern and encouragement, the practiced softness in her voice. "I appreciate you thinking of me," Claire said slowly, "but I have not fully decided yet. There is a lot to consider, especially with the wedding so close." Meredith's expression flickered, just for a moment, something sharper passing behind her eyes before the soft, worried mask slid back into place. "Of course," she said quickly. "I just want what is best for you. You know that." After Meredith left, Ellen emerged from the kitchen, her jaw tight with barely restrained anger. "She is not just betraying you," Ellen said. "She is actively trying to push you out of your own life, while pretending to help you build a better one. That is not friendship. That is something far uglier." Claire nodded, exhausted but resolute. She had suspected the depth of Meredith's manipulation, but hearing her mother articulate it so clearly made the reality of it settle even more heavily in her chest. That weekend, Claire hired the private investigator Grace had researched, a professional named Frank, who came highly recommended and had experience with cases involving infidelity. Frank listened to Claire's account of the situation with a calm, businesslike demeanor, taking notes on the dates, locations, and names Claire provided. "I will follow them during the trip," Frank said. "Photographs, video if possible, anything that clearly documents their relationship beyond doubt. I will also see if I can find out more about this apartment inquiry your friend made, confirm whether they have been actively looking at places together." Claire agreed to the plan, feeling a strange mixture of relief and heartbreak as she signed the paperwork. Relief, because she was finally taking concrete action instead of simply waiting and watching. Heartbreak, because hiring someone to follow her fiancé and best friend felt like the final, undeniable confirmation that the life she had planned for herself was already gone, replaced by something dark and unfamiliar that she now had to navigate alone. The days leading up to Daniel's supposed conference trip passed with agonizing slowness. Claire continued her careful performance at home, discussing final wedding details with a calm she did not feel, watching Daniel pack his suitcase with an expression of practiced patience, even as her heart pounded with dread and anticipation in equal measure. On the morning Daniel left for the airport, he kissed Claire goodbye and told her he loved her, the same words he had said 1,000 times before, though now they felt hollow and strange in her ears. She watched his car pull away from the window, then turned to find her mother and sister waiting behind her, ready to begin the final stretch of their careful investigation. Frank called that evening with his first update. Daniel and Meredith had indeed traveled to the same city, arriving on separate flights, but meeting shortly after at a restaurant near their shared hotel. Frank had photographs of them together, holding hands across the table, unmistakably affectionate in a way that left no room for innocent interpretation. Claire stared at the photographs Frank sent to her phone, feeling something inside her finally settle into place, a quiet, cold determination replacing the last remnants of hope she had been unconsciously clinging to. This was no longer a suspicion. This was fact, documented and undeniable. Over the following 2 days, Frank continued sending updates. Daniel and Meredith visited 2 different apartment buildings together, touring units with a real estate agent, discussing move-in dates and lease terms, as though building a life together was already a settled matter. Frank also managed to overhear part of a conversation between them at a coffee shop, in which Meredith expressed anxiety about the timing, worried that Claire seemed to be asking more questions than expected, worried that their plan might unravel before they were ready. Daniel had reassured her, according to Frank's notes, saying that everything would be finalized soon, that once the wedding invitations were officially canceled and Claire had accepted the job offer, there would be no way for her to interfere with their plans. Claire read Frank's report late at night, sitting alone at the kitchen table after her mother had gone to bed, The cruelty of the plan settled over her fully now, the calculated cold efficiency of it. They were not simply falling in love and making mistakes. They were engineering her exit from her own life with the precision of a business transaction, treating her heartbreak as an unfortunate but necessary cost of achieving what they wanted. She closed the report and sat in the quiet apartment, feeling grief and fury swirling together into something new, something sharper and more focused than either emotion alone. She thought of the wedding dress hanging in the closet, of the flowers already ordered, of every conversation over the past several months in which Daniel had smiled and lied to her face while planning an entirely different future behind her back. 2 weeks had felt like an eternity when this all began. Now, with the wedding only days away and Daniel due to return from his trip the following evening, Claire understood that the time for watching and waiting was drawing to a close. Soon, she would need to decide exactly how and when to reveal everything she had uncovered, and to whom. She thought of the circled date on Daniel's calendar once more, 1 week after the wedding, and wondered, with a chill running down her spine, exactly what significance that date still held in whatever plan remained unfinished. Daniel returned from his trip late the following evening, tired and slightly distracted, mentioning only briefly that the conference had gone well before retreating to the shower. Claire watched him from the doorway, studying the small details she now understood to be lies, the careful way he avoided meeting her eyes for too long, the phone he kept face down on the nightstand instead of leaving it out in the open as he usually did. She said nothing. She had promised herself, and Grace had reminded her again and again, that patience remained her greatest advantage. Confronting Daniel now, with the wedding only days away, would only give him and Meredith time to adjust their story, to cover their tracks even further, to prepare their defenses before Claire had the chance to present everything she had gathered. Instead, Claire focused her attention on the wedding shower, the event Meredith had insisted on planning so carefully. It was scheduled for that Saturday, just 4 days before the wedding itself, and Meredith had spent weeks talking about the decorations, the guest list, the small personal touches she promised would make the day unforgettable. Claire now understood the shower differently. She suspected it was meant to serve as cover, an event significant enough to occupy Claire's full attention and the attention of their mutual friends and family, while Daniel and Meredith used the distraction to finalize whatever remained of their plan. She resolved to attend, to smile, to play along completely, all while watching for any final piece of the puzzle that might reveal itself. The morning of the shower arrived bright and warm. Claire dressed carefully, choosing a soft blue dress that Meredith had once complimented, and arrived at the venue, a small event space Meredith had rented near the edge of town, to find the room already filled with balloons, flowers, and the soft chatter of gathering guests. Meredith greeted her at the door with a tight hug, and tears already forming in her eyes, gushing about how special the day was going to be, how much she loved Claire, how excited she was for the wedding just around the corner. Claire hugged her back, feeling the strange, hollow sensation of embracing someone who had spent months quietly working to dismantle her life. The shower proceeded much as any typical bridal shower might, filled with games, gifts, and laughter among friends and family, who had no idea of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Ellen and Grace attended as well, positioned carefully throughout the room, watching Meredith with careful, unreadable expressions whenever she was not looking their way. Midway through the event, Claire excused herself to use the restroom, taking the opportunity to step outside for a moment of quiet air. As she rounded the corner of the building, she overheard 2 voices near the parking lot, low and urgent, unmistakably belonging to Meredith and Daniel. Claire froze against the wall, straining to hear every word. "We cannot wait until after the wedding," Meredith was saying, her voice tight with anxiety, none of the practiced softness present now that she believed herself unheard. "If she goes through with it, it will be so much harder to walk away later. People will ask too many questions. We need to tell her before the ceremony, not after." "And say what exactly?" Daniel's voice carried an edge of frustration Claire had never heard from him before. "That we have been planning this for months? That we already looked at apartments together? She will destroy us both if we tell her the truth now." "Then we do not tell her the truth," Meredith said quickly. "We tell her you got cold feet. A last-minute crisis of confidence. It happens all the time. She will be devastated, but she will not suspect the real reason, not if we play it carefully. And once she takes that job and moves away, we can finally be together without anyone connecting the timing." Claire pressed her hand against her mouth, holding back the sound that threatened to escape her throat. Hearing the plan laid out so plainly, so coldly, in Meredith's own voice, was somehow worse than reading it in a message or seeing it in a photograph. This was not a mistake born of weak-willed emotion. This was a calculated strategy, refined and adjusted in real time, designed specifically to protect Daniel and Meredith, while leaving Claire confused, heartbroken, and entirely unaware of the true reason her engagement had fallen apart. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to steady her racing heart, and quietly made her way back inside before either of them noticed she had overheard anything. She found Grace near the gift table and pulled her aside, whispering everything she had just heard. Grace's expression darkened with fury, but she kept her voice low and controlled. "This changes things," Grace said. "They are planning to call off the wedding themselves before it happens, framing it as Daniel's decision, his cold feet, so that no one suspects the truth. If that happens, you lose the chance to expose them properly. Everyone will feel sorry for you, sure, but they will believe it was simply bad timing, not betrayal." Claire felt a fresh wave of anger rise inside her, hot and sharp. She was not going to allow Daniel and Meredith to control the narrative any longer, to decide when and how the truth would be revealed, softening the story to protect their own reputations, while leaving her humiliated and confused. If they intended to make their move before the wedding, then Claire needed to make her move first. She excused herself early from the shower, claiming a headache, and asked Grace and Ellen to gather everything they had collected over the past 2 weeks that evening. It was time to plan the confrontation carefully, deliberately, ensuring that when the truth finally came out, it would come out entirely on Claire's terms, in front of the people who needed to see it most clearly. That night, the 3 women sat together at the kitchen table once more, surrounded by printed messages, photographs, receipts, and Frank's detailed investigative report. They discussed timing, location, and the best way to ensure that Daniel and Meredith would have no opportunity to twist the story before the truth had fully landed. "The rehearsal dinner," Ellen suggested finally. "Everyone important will already be gathered in one place. Family, close friends, even some of Meredith's own relatives. If the truth comes out there, in front of everyone, there will be no room for them to spin a softer version of events afterward." Claire considered this carefully. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for the evening before the wedding, just 3 days away. It would indeed gather nearly everyone who mattered, the very people Meredith had likely been quietly influencing over the past several months in preparation for her eventual, carefully managed exit from Claire's life. "It has to be undeniable," Claire said finally. "Not just messages people can dismiss as taken out of context. Not just my word against theirs. It has to be something so complete, so overwhelming, that there is no room left for doubt or sympathy toward either of them." Grace nodded, already sketching out a plan on a fresh sheet of paper. They would compile everything, the messages, the photographs from Frank's investigation, the recorded conversation Claire had overheard outside the shower, into a single, undeniable presentation. Grace suggested printing physical copies as well as preparing a digital version, ensuring that even if someone attempted to interrupt or discredit the presentation, there would be multiple forms of evidence available for everyone to see clearly. Ellen, meanwhile, quietly reached out to a few trusted family members and close friends, people she knew would stand firmly by Claire once the truth was revealed, ensuring that Claire would have visible support in the room, rather than facing the moment entirely alone. As the plan took shape over the following days, Claire continued her careful performance at home, discussing final wedding preparations with Daniel as though nothing had changed, smiling through conversations that now felt unbearably hollow. She noticed Daniel growing increasingly anxious as the days passed, checking his phone more frequently, stepping outside to take calls he claimed were from vendors or family members, but which Claire now understood were almost certainly conversations with Meredith, the two of them nervously finalizing the timing of their planned announcement. Meredith, too, seemed increasingly on edge whenever Claire saw her, her usual practiced tears now carrying a slight tremor of genuine nervousness beneath the performance. Claire wondered if some part of Meredith sensed that something had shifted, that the careful control she had maintained over the situation for months was beginning to slip away from her, though she likely had no idea exactly how much Claire already knew. 2 days before the rehearsal dinner, Claire received a message from Meredith that made her blood run cold, despite having expected something like it might come. "Can we talk tomorrow? Just the two of us. There is something important I need to tell you, and I think it would be better if you heard it from me first, before anything else happens." Claire understood immediately what this meant. Meredith and Daniel had decided to move their plan forward, likely intending to stage the supposed breakup before the rehearsal dinner even began, ensuring the narrative was firmly established before Claire had any chance to reveal the truth herself. She showed the message to Grace and Ellen, and the three women exchanged a look of grim understanding. There was no more time to wait. If Meredith intended to strike first, Claire would need to move even faster, gathering the final pieces of her presentation and preparing herself completely for the confrontation that was now only hours away rather than days. That night, Claire barely slept, running through every possible scenario in her mind, rehearsing exactly how she would present the evidence, exactly what she would say, exactly how she would ensure that the truth landed with the full weight and clarity it deserved. She thought of the years of friendship with Meredith, now revealed as hollow and calculated. She thought of the love she had once felt for Daniel, now curdled into something bitter and painful, and she thought of the strength she had discovered within herself over these past 2 weeks, a strength she had not known she possessed until circumstances forced her to find it. Tomorrow, Meredith wanted to talk. Claire intended to make sure that conversation went very differently than either Meredith or Daniel had planned. Claire chose the same small cafe where Meredith always seemed most comfortable performing her carefully constructed emotions, believing it would be easier to maintain control of the conversation on familiar ground. Claire arrived early, taking a seat near the back where she could see the entire room, and waited with a calm she did not entirely feel, but had practiced carefully in the mirror that morning. Meredith arrived exactly on time, already dressed in soft, muted colors that seemed designed to project vulnerability, her eyes rimmed with the faint redness of tears already shed, or perhaps only prepared in advance. She slid into the seat across from Claire and reached for her hand immediately, her fingers cold and trembling. "I do not know how to say this," Meredith began, her voice cracking on cue. "Daniel came to me last night. He is scared, Claire. He does not think he is ready for marriage. He asked me for advice because he did not know how to tell you himself, and I told him he needed to be honest with you, no matter how much it hurts." Claire kept her expression carefully neutral, studying her friend's face with the detached focus of someone gathering final evidence rather than someone receiving devastating news. "He asked you for advice," Claire repeated slowly. "I know how strange that sounds," Meredith continued, tears now falling freely down her cheeks. "But you know how close we have always been, the three of us. He trusts me. I think he is going to tell you tonight that he needs more time, maybe even that he wants to postpone the wedding. I just wanted you to hear it from someone who loves you first, so it would not blindside you completely." Claire allowed a long silence to stretch between them, watching Meredith's composure begin to waver slightly under the weight of it. Finally she spoke, her voice steady and calm in a way that seemed to unsettle Meredith more than any outburst could have. "I know about the apartment you looked at together," Claire said quietly. "I know about the job you have been pushing me toward, the one you already contacted a real estate agent about on my behalf, even though I never asked you to. I know about the trip last week, the hotel room, the photographs. I know about the conversation you had with Daniel outside the shower, where you both discussed how to convince me it was simply cold feet rather than tell me the truth." Meredith's face went white, the tears stopping abruptly, as genuine shock replaced the practiced performance. For a long moment, she said nothing at all, her mouth opening and closing without producing any sound. "I do not know what you think you know," Meredith finally managed, her voice suddenly sharper, the softness draining away entirely. "But you are misunderstanding everything. Daniel and I are just friends. We have always been close, you know that. Whatever you think you saw or heard, it is not what it looks like." "I have photographs," Claire said calmly. "I have messages going back 5 months. I have a recording of the conversation outside the shower. I know about the job offer being a setup to send me away so the two of you could build a life together, without guilt following you. I know everything, Meredith, and I am done pretending otherwise." Meredith's expression shifted rapidly through several emotions, shock giving way to anger, anger giving way to something colder and more calculating. "You had someone follow us," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You had someone spy on Daniel's business trip." "You mean the trip where the two of you toured apartments together and discussed lease terms?" Claire asked, keeping her voice level despite the fury building steadily beneath her calm exterior. "Yes, I had someone document exactly what the two of you have been planning for months." Meredith sat back in her chair, her earlier tears now entirely absent, replaced by a hard, assessing look that Claire had never seen on her friend's face before. A look that felt like meeting a stranger wearing Meredith's familiar features. "You do not understand what you are doing," Meredith said finally. "If you expose this now, you will humiliate everyone. Your family, his family, all our friends. Everyone will be talking about it for years. Is that really what you want?" Claire felt a strange calm settle over her at the question, a clarity she had been building toward for 2 long weeks. "What I want," she said slowly, "is for the truth to be known by the people who trusted both of you. What I want is for everyone to understand exactly what kind of person you really are, instead of the version you have spent years carefully performing. And what I want most of all is for you to understand that I am no longer the naive, trusting woman you believed you could manipulate without consequence." Meredith's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Claire thought her former friend might attempt another round of tears, another desperate performance to regain control of the conversation. Instead, Meredith leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, cold whisper. "You have no idea what you are about to do to yourself. People will say you were paranoid, obsessive, unstable. I have already made sure of that. Nobody will believe you over me." The threat landed exactly as Meredith intended, a cold spike of fear cutting through Claire's carefully maintained composure. But rather than crumbling beneath it, Claire felt something else rise up instead, a fierce and steady determination that pushed the fear aside entirely. "You are welcome to try," Claire said quietly, "but I have proof, Meredith. Real, undeniable proof. And tomorrow night, at the rehearsal dinner, everyone is going to see exactly what that proof shows." Meredith's face drained of all remaining color. "You cannot do that," she said, her voice rising slightly, drawing the attention of a nearby table. "You cannot humiliate us like that in front of everyone." "I am not humiliating anyone," Claire said, standing up and gathering her things with steady, deliberate movements. "You and Daniel did that yourselves, the moment you decided my heartbreak was an acceptable cost for what you wanted. I am simply making sure the truth is known." She left Meredith sitting alone at the table, tears now returning, though Claire no longer had any way of knowing whether they were genuine or simply another performance for the benefit of the surrounding customers who had turned to watch the scene unfold. She walked out into the afternoon sunlight, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade, replaced by an exhausted, hollow ache in her chest. She called Grace immediately, relaying everything that had happened, her voice shaking as she recounted Meredith's threat about her reputation, about people believing Meredith over her. Grace listened carefully, her voice steady and reassuring on the other end of the line. "She said that because she is scared," Grace said. "People who are confident in their position do not need to threaten others into silence. She knows the truth is about to come out, and she is trying to intimidate you into backing down before that happens. Do not let her." Claire nodded to herself, though Grace could not see the gesture. "I am not backing down," she said firmly. "Tomorrow night, everyone is going to know exactly who Meredith really is." That evening, Daniel returned home earlier than usual, his expression tight with barely controlled anxiety. He did not mention the conversation with Meredith directly, but Claire could tell from his behavior that Meredith had already told him everything, that he now understood Claire knew far more than they had ever anticipated. "We need to talk," Daniel said, his voice unusually quiet as he sat across from Claire at the kitchen table. "Yes," Claire agreed calmly, "we do." Daniel's composure cracked slightly at her steady, unbothered tone, clearly having expected tears, anger, some emotional outburst he could manage or redirect. Instead, he faced a woman who had spent 2 weeks preparing precisely for this moment, and his uncertainty was written plainly across his face. "I do not know what Meredith told you," he began carefully, but I think there has been some kind of misunderstanding between the two of you, and I want to make sure we address it before things get out of hand." "There is no misunderstanding," Claire said. "I know about the affair. I know about the apartment. I know about the plan to send me away with a fake job offer, so the two of you could be together without anyone connecting the timing. I have proof, Daniel. Extensive proof. And tomorrow night, at the rehearsal dinner, I intend to share it." Daniel's face went through the same rapid progression Meredith's had: shock, denial, and finally, something colder and more defensive settling into place. "You are going to humiliate me in front of my entire family," he said, his voice rising with anger now rather than fear. "In front of your family? Is that really the kind of person you are?" "I am the kind of person," Claire said, standing up slowly, "who refuses to let two people manipulate and betray her while pretending everything is fine. I am the kind of person who will not disappear quietly just because it is more convenient for you and Meredith. Tomorrow night, everyone will know the truth. What you and Meredith decide to do with that truth afterward is entirely up to you." She left him sitting alone at the table, his face pale with the dawning realization that whatever careful plan he and Meredith had constructed was about to collapse entirely, on a stage far more public than either of them had ever intended, in front of every person whose opinion mattered most to them both. Claire spent the rest of the evening with Grace and Ellen, finalizing every detail of the presentation they would deliver the following night. They reviewed the photographs one final time, organized the messages into a clear and undeniable sequence, and confirmed that the audio recording from outside the shower was clear enough for everyone in the room to understand exactly what it revealed. As the night wore on, Claire felt a strange sense of calm settle over her, replacing the anxiety and heartbreak that had consumed her for the past 2 weeks. Tomorrow night, the truth would finally be known. And whatever happened afterward, whatever fallout followed, Claire intended to walk into that rehearsal dinner as a woman fully in control of her own story, for the first time since this entire nightmare had begun. Morning arrived with a strange, heavy stillness over the apartment. Daniel had left early, claiming he needed to handle last-minute errands before the rehearsal dinner that evening, though Claire suspected he had really gone to meet with Meredith, the two of them scrambling to figure out how to manage the disaster now bearing down on them both. Claire spent the morning with Grace and Ellen, going over the presentation one final time. Grace had prepared a laptop connected to a portable projector, borrowed from a friend who worked in event planning, ensuring that when the moment came, the evidence could be displayed clearly for everyone in the room to see, without any possibility of confusion or misinterpretation. "We need a plan for exactly how this unfolds," Grace said, pacing slowly across the living room. "Timing matters. If you bring this up too early in the evening, people might not yet be settled enough to fully absorb what they are seeing. Too late, and people may have had enough to drink that the moment loses its impact. Or worse, things could turn chaotic." Ellen suggested waiting until after the toasts had been given, a natural pause in the evening, when everyone's attention would already be focused at the front of the room. Claire agreed, feeling a fresh wave of nervous energy at the thought of standing before everyone she loved and revealing the painful truth that had been hidden from them for months. As the afternoon wore on, Claire received a call from an unfamiliar number. She answered cautiously, and was surprised to hear the voice of a woman named Laura, identifying herself as a former co-worker of Meredith's. "I heard through mutual friends that you might be looking into something involving Meredith," Laura said carefully. "I do not know exactly what is going on, but I thought you should know something. This is not the first time Meredith has done something like this. There was a situation a few years ago, before you two reconnected as adults, involving another engaged couple. Meredith became close with the bride, and eventually, the engagement fell apart under strange circumstances. I always wondered if there was more to that story than anyone let on." Claire felt a chill spread through her chest as she absorbed this information. She thanked Laura for reaching out and asked if she would be willing to share anything else she remembered, perhaps even provide a statement if things escalated further. Laura agreed, promising to send over what details she could recall by email that afternoon. When Claire relayed this new information to Grace and Ellen, the three women sat in stunned silence for a long moment. If what Laura said was true, this was not an isolated betrayal born of unexpected emotion. This was a pattern, a repeated behavior, suggesting that Meredith had done something similar before, perhaps refining her methods each time, growing more careful and more calculated with practice. "This changes the entire picture," Ellen said finally. "If she has done this before, then people need to understand that this is not simply a mistake made in a moment of weakness. This is who she is. This is what she does." Laura's email arrived an hour later, detailing the situation from years earlier, with as much accuracy as she could recall. The bride's name, according to Laura, had been a woman named Sophie Whitmore, and the engagement had ended just weeks before the wedding, following what everyone at the time believed was a simple change of heart on the groom's part. Laura mentioned that Meredith had grown unusually close to the groom during the months leading up to the sudden breakup, though nothing had ever been confirmed, and the truth had faded quietly into rumor and speculation, before eventually being forgotten entirely. Claire added this new information to the growing presentation, though she was careful to frame it appropriately, noting clearly that this was second-hand information from someone who had witnessed the earlier situation, rather than direct proof in the way her own evidence against Daniel and Meredith was proof. Still, it painted a disturbing picture of a pattern that had apparently gone unnoticed and unaddressed for years. As the afternoon shifted toward evening, Claire began preparing for the rehearsal dinner, dressing carefully in a deep green dress that made her feel strong and composed rather than soft and vulnerable. She studied herself in the mirror for a long moment, hardly recognizing the steady, determined woman staring back at her, so different from the devastated figure who had sat on the kitchen floor 2 weeks earlier, staring at a broken phone screen. Grace and Ellen arrived shortly after, both dressed elegantly for the evening, carrying the laptop and portable projector, carefully packed inside a bag that looked unremarkable enough not to draw attention as they entered the venue. The rehearsal dinner was held at a private event space attached to a well-regarded restaurant downtown, the same venue where Claire and Daniel had celebrated their engagement 3 years earlier. The irony of the location was not lost on Claire as she walked through the front doors, greeting family members and friends with practiced smiles, while her heart pounded steadily beneath her calm exterior. Daniel arrived shortly after, looking pale and unsettled, offering only a tight nod in Claire's direction before retreating to speak quietly with a small group of his relatives near the bar. Meredith arrived several minutes later, dressed in a soft lavender dress, her eyes already carefully lined with the faint redness of practiced tears, greeting guests with hugs and warm smiles that Claire now recognized as entirely hollow. Claire's mother had quietly reached out to several key family members over the past 2 days, including Claire's Aunt Diane and Daniel's own sister, a woman named Sophie, who had always been close with Claire, ensuring they understood something significant was about to happen and encouraging them to remain calm and supportive no matter what unfolded. As the evening progressed, guests mingled and chatted, unaware of the storm building quietly beneath the surface of polite conversation and clinking glasses. Claire moved through the room with practiced grace, accepting compliments on her dress, discussing wedding details with distant relatives who had no idea the wedding itself now hung by the thinnest of threads. Dinner was served, and the meal passed with agonizing slowness for Claire, who found it difficult to eat anything at all, her stomach twisted tightly with nervous anticipation. She caught Meredith watching her carefully from across the room several times throughout the meal, her expression difficult to read beneath the carefully maintained mask of warmth and celebration. As dessert was cleared away, the venue's coordinator approached the microphone at the front of the room, announcing that it was time for the evening's toasts. Claire's heart began pounding even harder as several close family members and friends stood to offer warm, heartfelt words about Claire and Daniel's relationship, unaware that every word only deepened the painful irony of what was about to happen. Daniel's best man offered a toast, filled with humor and affection, recounting stories from their college years, drawing warm laughter from the gathered guests. Claire's own maid of honor, a role that would have belonged to Meredith under normal circumstances, but had been quietly reassigned to Grace over the past 2 days without explanation, stood next and offered a brief, elegant toast about the strength of true friendship and loyalty, her words carrying a pointed edge that only Claire, Ellen, and a few others fully understood. Finally, as the toasts drew to a close and the room settled into a comfortable, celebratory quiet, Claire rose slowly from her seat, her heart pounding, her hands trembling slightly despite her best efforts to remain composed. She walked toward the front of the room, aware of every eye turning to follow her movement, aware of Daniel's face going pale as he watched her approach the microphone, aware of Meredith's carefully maintained smile beginning to falter at the edges. Grace moved quietly toward the back of the room, setting up the small projector and connecting it to a blank section of wall near the front, ready to display everything the moment Claire gave the signal. Claire took a slow, steadying breath, gripping the microphone with both hands, and looked out over the sea of familiar faces gathered to celebrate a wedding that she now knew, with absolute certainty, would never take place. At least not in the way anyone in that room currently believed. "Before we finish the evening," Claire began, her voice carrying clearly through the quiet room, "there is something everyone here deserves to know." A ripple of confused murmurs spread through the room, as guests exchanged uncertain glances, unsure what to make of the sudden shift in tone from the woman who moments earlier had seemed simply another emotional bride on the eve of her wedding. Daniel half rose from his seat near the front table, his expression a mixture of panic and pleading, though Claire did not look in his direction. "For the past 2 weeks," Claire continued, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart, "I have known something that most of you do not. I discovered that Daniel and my best friend, Meredith, have been having an affair for the past 5 months. I discovered that they planned, together, to encourage me to take a job in another city, far away from everyone I know, so they could build a life together without anyone questioning the timing of my sudden departure." The murmurs grew louder, shock rippling visibly across the faces of the gathered guests. Meredith's carefully maintained composure shattered entirely, her face draining of color as she realized, with dawning horror, exactly what was about to happen in front of everyone she knew. "Claire, please," Meredith said, her voice cracking, standing up from her seat with tears already streaming down her face. "This is not the place for this. Whatever you think you know, we can talk about it privately. We do not need to do this here, in front of everyone." "We tried talking privately yesterday," Claire said calmly, turning to look directly at her former best friend for the first time since beginning her speech. "You told me people would believe you over me. You told me I had no idea what I was about to do to myself. So I decided the fairest thing to do was let everyone see the truth for themselves, rather than trusting either of us to describe it honestly." She nodded toward Grace, who activated the small projector, casting the first image onto the blank wall behind Claire. It was a photograph Frank had captured during the supposed conference trip, Daniel and Meredith seated together at a restaurant, hands intertwined across the table, their expressions unmistakably intimate. Gasps echoed through the room as guests processed the image, several hands rising to cover open mouths in shock. Daniel's mother, seated near the front, let out a small, strangled sound of disbelief, staring between her son and the projected image with an expression of dawning horror. Claire allowed the image to remain displayed for a long moment before continuing, her voice remaining calm and clear, despite the storm of emotion visibly building throughout the room. "This is from a business trip Daniel took last week," she said. Meredith joined him. Together, they toured 2 different apartments in that city, discussing lease terms and move-in dates with a real estate agent. Grace advanced to the next image, showing Daniel and Meredith standing together outside an apartment building, a real estate agent gesturing toward the entrance while they smiled at each other, entirely unaware they were being photographed. "This is not a moment of weakness," Claire continued, her voice growing slightly sharper now, though still remarkably controlled given the magnitude of what she was revealing. "This is not 2 people accidentally falling into feelings they could not control. This was planned. Carefully, deliberately planned, over the course of months." She nodded again, and Grace displayed a screenshot of the message Meredith had sent to Sophie, the co-worker, weeks earlier. Claire read the message aloud, her voice steady despite the venom contained in the words themselves. "Once the wedding falls apart and she moves for the job, everyone will just think it was bad timing. No one will ever know we planned it." The room fell into a stunned, heavy silence following the reading of the message, broken only by Meredith's increasingly desperate sobbing as she sank back into her chair, her face buried in her hands. Whether the tears were genuine grief at finally being exposed, or simply another desperate performance, Claire no longer cared to determine. Daniel stood fully now, his face pale and stricken, attempting to speak, though his voice came out barely above a whisper. "Claire, please, Let me explain. It is not as bad as it looks. I overheard you and Meredith outside my own wedding shower, Claire said, cutting him off firmly, discussing exactly how you planned to convince me it was simply cold feet, rather than admit the truth. I have that conversation recorded. She nodded toward Grace one final time, and the room filled with the sound of Meredith's own voice, tinny but unmistakable through the small speaker connected to the projector, recounting the very words she had spoken outside the shower just days earlier. The room listened in stunned, horrified silence as the recording played through in its entirety, every calculated word landing with devastating clarity among the gathered friends and family. When the recording finished, the silence that followed felt almost unbearable, broken only by scattered gasps and the quiet, choked sound of someone crying softly near the back of the room. Claire looked out over the crowd, meeting the shocked, betrayed expressions of people who had known and trusted both Daniel and Meredith for years, people who had believed, just moments earlier, that they were gathered to celebrate a joyous occasion rather than witness the collapse of a carefully constructed lie. I also learned something else, Claire continued, her voice softening slightly, though it carried no less weight. This is apparently not the first time something like this has happened. A woman named Sophie Whitmore experienced something disturbingly similar several years ago, an engagement that fell apart under strange circumstances after Meredith grew unusually close with the groom during the months leading up to the wedding. A woman near the middle of the room, someone Claire did not recognize, made a small, sharp sound of surprise, exchanging a stunned glance with the person seated beside her. Claire later learned this woman had known Sophie Whitmore personally and had always wondered about the strange circumstances surrounding that long-forgotten broken engagement. Meredith lifted her head from her hands, her makeup smeared with genuine tears now, her expression a mixture of fury and desperation as she looked out over the room full of shocked, judging faces. "You do not understand," she said, her voice raw and cracking. "I have loved Daniel for years, long before he ever met you. This was not some cruel game. I actually love him." "Then, you should have been honest," Claire said quietly. "You should have told me the truth months ago, instead of pretending to be my best friend, while secretly working to destroy everything I had. Instead of manipulating me into believing a job offer was a genuine opportunity, rather than an exile you engineered to remove me from my own life. Whatever feelings you believe you have for Daniel do not excuse the months of calculated deception you both engaged in." Daniel's father, a stern, quiet man who had always treated Claire kindly over the years, rose slowly from his seat, his expression grim and disappointed as he looked at his son. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice low and heavy. "All of it?" Daniel opened his mouth, seemingly searching for some explanation that might soften the devastating truth, now fully exposed before everyone present. But no words came. His silence, more than any confession could have, confirmed everything Claire had revealed. Claire's own mother rose from her seat and walked slowly to stand beside her daughter, placing a steady, supportive hand on Claire's shoulder. Grace joined them a moment later, standing on Claire's other side, the three women presenting a united, unshakable front before the shocked and reeling crowd. "I did not want to do this here, in front of everyone," Claire said finally, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "But Meredith made it clear yesterday that if I did not expose the truth publicly and completely, she would ensure people believed her version of events over mine, painting me as unstable and paranoid, rather than betrayed. I refuse to let that happen. I refuse to let either of them control this story any longer." She set down the microphone gently, the sound echoing softly through the stunned silence that followed. Around the room, guests slowly began rising from their seats, some moving toward Claire with expressions of sympathy and support, others turning away from Daniel and Meredith with visible disgust and disappointment. Meredith remained slumped in her chair, sobbing openly now, though few in the room seemed inclined to offer comfort any longer. Daniel stood frozen near the front table, his face pale and stricken, watching as the carefully constructed life he had planned with Meredith collapsed entirely in front of everyone whose respect and trust had mattered most to him. The rehearsal dinner that was meant to celebrate a wedding had instead become the stage for its complete unraveling. And as Claire stood surrounded by her mother and sister, accepting the quiet, steady support of friends and family who now understood the full truth, she felt something shift inside her chest, a heavy weight finally beginning to lift after 2 agonizing weeks of careful, painful preparation. The truth was out. There was no taking it back now, no softening it, no controlling how it landed. Whatever came next, Claire understood that she had reclaimed something vital in that moment, standing before everyone, and refusing to let her own heartbreak be twisted into someone else's convenient story. The aftermath of the rehearsal dinner unfolded quickly and painfully. Guests began filing out of the venue in small, hushed groups, many pausing to offer Claire quiet words of support before leaving, some hugging her tightly, others simply squeezing her hand with an expression of sorrowful understanding. Daniel's parents remained behind briefly, approaching Claire with visible shame and heartbreak of their own, apologizing repeatedly for their son's actions, though Claire assured them gently that none of this was their fault. Meredith's own mother, a soft-spoken woman named Karen, who had known Claire since childhood, approached last, her eyes red-rimmed and her hands trembling as she embraced Claire tightly. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "I do not know what happened to my daughter, why she would do something like this. I raised her better than this. I promise you, I raised her better than this." Claire returned the embrace, feeling a complicated mixture of grief and compassion for a woman who was clearly grappling with her own shock and heartbreak over her daughter's actions. "This is not your fault," Claire said quietly. "You did nothing wrong." By the time the venue had mostly emptied, only Claire, Ellen, Grace, and a small handful of the closest family friends remained, along with Daniel and Meredith, who sat separately now, no longer even attempting to maintain the pretense of unity in front of the dwindling crowd. Daniel approached Claire hesitantly as she gathered her things, his expression a mixture of shame and desperation. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I never meant for it to happen this way. I never meant to hurt you like this." Claire looked at him for a long moment, searching for some flicker of the man she had once loved, the man she had planned to spend her entire life with. She found only a stranger now, someone whose careful lies had unraveled entirely, leaving behind only the hollow shell of apology that came far too late to mean anything. "You did not mean for it to happen this way," Claire repeated slowly. "But you meant for it to happen. You planned it for months, Daniel. The apology does not change that." She turned and walked away without waiting for a response, joining her mother and sister near the exit, the three of them leaving the venue together as a united, unbreakable force against the wreckage left behind. The following days brought a whirlwind of fallout that Claire had not fully anticipated, despite all her careful preparation. Word of what had happened at the rehearsal dinner spread quickly through their shared social circles, friends and family reaching out to Claire with messages of support, many expressing shock and anger on her behalf, some sharing their own uneasy memories of moments when Meredith's behavior had seemed slightly too calculated, too convenient, though none of them had thought to question it at the time. Laura, the former co-worker who had first reached out about Sophie Whitmore, contacted Claire again, letting her know that several other people had come forward after hearing about what happened at the rehearsal dinner, sharing their own stories of Meredith's manipulative behavior over the years. It seemed that Claire's public exposure of the truth had opened a door that allowed others to finally speak honestly about a pattern many had noticed, but never fully understood or addressed. Sophie Whitmore herself reached out directly, several days after the rehearsal dinner, having heard about what happened through mutual connections. She explained, in a long and emotional message, that she had always suspected something more had happened during her own broken engagement years earlier, though she had never had proof, and had eventually convinced herself she was simply being paranoid. Reading about Claire's experience had given her the confidence to finally trust her own instincts about what had happened to her. The two women spoke on the phone for nearly 2 hours, comparing notes, offering each other a strange but comforting solidarity, born from shared betrayal. Sophie mentioned that she intended to speak with a few of her own old friends about the situation, curious whether anyone might have additional information that could confirm what she had long suspected, but never been able to prove. Meanwhile, Claire focused on the practical matters of untangling her life from Daniel's. She met again with Karen the lawyer, who helped her formally break the joint lease and separate their remaining shared finances cleanly and fairly. The wedding venue, thankfully, offered a partial refund given the highly unusual circumstances, and Claire spent an emotional afternoon canceling the remaining vendors, each conversation a fresh reminder of the future she had once envisioned that would now never come to pass. Daniel attempted to reach out several more times over the following week, sending long messages filled with apologies and explanations that Claire mostly left unread. She understood, with a clarity that surprised even herself, that she did not need his explanations to move forward. The evidence had already told her everything she needed to know, and no amount of remorseful messaging could change the months of calculated deception that had preceded this moment. Meredith, notably, made no attempt to contact Claire at all in the days following the rehearsal dinner. Claire learned through mutual friends that Meredith had left town shortly after, moving in with a distant relative in another state, apparently unable to face the social fallout that had followed her exposure so publicly and completely. Whether this represented genuine remorse, or simply a strategic retreat, Claire could not say for certain, and found that she no longer particularly cared to know. 2 weeks after the rehearsal dinner, on what would have been her wedding day, Claire woke up in her apartment alone, sunlight streaming through the curtains, and felt something unexpected settle over her. Not grief, though grief remained present in quieter moments. Not anger, though anger still occasionally surfaced when she thought too long about the months of careful manipulation she had endured. Instead, she felt a strange, quiet sense of relief, a recognition that whatever pain remained, she had faced the worst of it directly, honestly, and on her own terms. Grace and Ellen arrived that morning with breakfast and flowers, transforming what could have been an unbearably painful day into something gentler, filled with quiet laughter and the comfortable presence of family who had stood beside her through every difficult moment of the past month. "You know," Grace said, as they sat together on the balcony, coffee cups warming their hands in the crisp morning air, "you handled all of this with more strength than I think either Daniel or Meredith ever expected from you. They clearly believed you would fall apart quietly and let them control the story. Instead, you built an entire case against them and exposed the truth in front of everyone who mattered. That takes real courage." Claire considered this for a long moment, watching the soft morning light spread across the city skyline in the distance. "I did not feel very courageous," she admitted. "Most of the time, I just felt scared and heartbroken and furious, all tangled together." "That is exactly what courage looks like most of the time," Ellen said gently, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "It is not the absence of fear, it is doing what needs to be done despite the fear." Claire smiled softly at her mother's words, feeling a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee warming her hands. She thought of the woman she had been 2 weeks earlier, sitting broken on her kitchen floor, staring at a cracked phone screen, uncertain of anything except the devastating betrayal she had just discovered. She thought of the woman she had become since then, steady, determined, unwilling to let anyone else write the ending to her own story. The wedding that was supposed to happen that day would never take place, not with Daniel, not in the way she had once imagined it, but sitting there on the balcony with her mother and sister, surrounded by love that had never wavered despite everything, Claire understood that this was not truly an ending. It was simply the closing of one chapter, painful and unexpected, giving way to something new that she alone would now have the freedom to write. 1 month after the rehearsal dinner, Claire received an unexpected call from Sophie Whitmore, her voice carrying a note of urgency that immediately caught Claire's attention. Sophie explained that she had spoken with several old friends from the time of her broken engagement, and one of them, a woman who had briefly dated Meredith's cousin years earlier, revealed something Sophie had never known before. According to this friend, Meredith had actually kept a detailed journal during the time of Sophie's engagement, documenting her feelings for the groom and her careful strategy for winning his affection away from Sophie without anyone suspecting her involvement. The friend had seen portions of this journal by accident years earlier, though she had never understood its full significance until hearing about what had happened between Claire, Daniel, and Meredith. Sophie had managed to track down this old friend and convinced her to share what she remembered, along with a few photographs she had taken of specific journal pages years earlier, uncertain why she had even bothered photographing them at the time, beyond a vague sense that something about the entries felt unsettling. Claire felt a chill run through her as Sophie described the contents of these old photographs. The journal entries revealed a chillingly methodical approach, remarkably similar to what Claire herself had experienced, complete with careful notes about how to appear sympathetic and supportive, while quietly working to undermine the relationship from within. Meredith had apparently used almost identical tactics years earlier, isolating Sophie from her support system, planting subtle doubts, positioning herself as the trustworthy confidant, while secretly working toward an entirely different outcome. "I think we need to share this," Sophie said carefully. "Not to be cruel, but because I think other people deserve to know the truth about the pattern here, especially anyone who might still be close to Meredith, who might not yet understand what she is truly capable of." Claire agreed, though she felt no particular satisfaction in the discovery, only a heavy, sobering confirmation of just how calculated and repeated Meredith's behavior truly was. Together, Claire and Sophie decided to compile everything they had gathered, from Claire's own extensive evidence to Sophie's newly uncovered journal photographs, into a single, organized account that they shared privately with a small group of mutual friends and family members who remained close to Meredith, hoping to prevent her from repeating this pattern again with someone new. The response was immediate and significant. Several people who had remained cautiously sympathetic toward Meredith following the rehearsal dinner scandal, believing perhaps that she had made a single serious mistake, born of genuine feelings for Daniel, now understood the fuller, darker picture of a woman who had apparently engaged in this exact behavior more than once, refining her methods each time with unsettling precision. Meredith's mother, Karen, reached out to Claire once more after learning about the journal entries, her voice heavy with a grief that seemed to have deepened considerably since their conversation at the rehearsal dinner. "I do not know how to reconcile this with the daughter I thought I knew," she admitted quietly. "I think I need to accept that there are parts of her I never truly understood, parts she kept carefully hidden from everyone who loved her." Claire found herself feeling a complicated sympathy for Karen, understanding that she, too, was a kind of victim in this situation, grieving the loss of the daughter she believed she had raised, while confronting the unsettling reality of who that daughter had actually become. As for Daniel, Claire learned through mutual acquaintances that he had also distanced himself from Meredith following the rehearsal dinner, apparently unable to fully process his own role in the deception once the full weight of public exposure had settled over him. Whether this reflected genuine remorse or simply damage control, Claire found she truly did not care to speculate further. Her focus had shifted entirely away from either of them, toward rebuilding the life that had been so carefully disrupted. 3 months after the wedding that never happened, Claire made the decision to leave her old apartment behind entirely, moving into a bright, sunlit space across town that felt entirely her own, free from the memories and associations that had haunted every corner of her previous home. She redecorated slowly and thoughtfully, choosing furniture and colors that reflected her own tastes rather than the compromises she had made throughout her relationship with Daniel. Her career, too, began to flourish in unexpected ways. Diane, her manager, had quietly recommended her for a promotion during the difficult weeks following the scandal, recognizing the quiet strength and professionalism Claire had maintained throughout everything happening in her personal life. Claire accepted the new position, a senior marketing role with expanded responsibilities, finding a renewed sense of purpose and confidence in her work that had nothing to do with anyone else's plans or expectations for her life. She reconnected with old friends she had drifted from over the years, people who had perhaps sensed, without fully understanding, that Meredith's influence had subtly pulled her away from other meaningful relationships. She built new friendships as well, including an unexpected but deeply valued connection with Sophie Whitmore, the two women bonding over shared experience, in a way that felt less like commiseration over shared pain, and more like genuine, hard-won solidarity. Grace remained a constant, steady presence throughout this period of rebuilding, and Ellen eventually returned to her own home, though she called Claire every few days, her voice always carrying the same warm, unwavering support that had carried Claire through the darkest weeks of the entire ordeal. 6 months after the rehearsal dinner, Claire found herself sitting once again on her balcony, this time in her new apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. She thought back to the woman she had been on the day she discovered Daniel's message to Meredith, shattered and uncertain, unable to imagine how she might survive the devastating betrayal unfolding before her. She thought, too, of the woman she had become in the months since, someone who had learned to trust her own instincts, to gather evidence, and build careful, patient plans, rather than react impulsively out of fear or pain. Someone who understood, now more than ever, the difference between genuine love and calculated manipulation, between real friendship and careful, patient performance. She had lost a fiancé and a best friend within the same devastating discovery, two of the most important relationships in her life, revealed to be built on months of careful deception. But in the process of confronting that loss, she had discovered something far more valuable, a deep, unshakable trust in her own strength and judgment, a network of genuine support that had proven itself steady and reliable through the most difficult circumstances imaginable, and a clear understanding of exactly what she deserved from the people she chose to let close to her heart moving forward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in its final brilliant colors, before surrendering to the quiet darkness of evening, Claire allowed herself a small, genuine smile. The path ahead remained uncertain in many ways, as it always does for anyone rebuilding a life from the wreckage of betrayal. But for the first time in a very long while, Claire felt entirely, completely certain of one thing. She was no longer the woman anyone could quietly send into exile, manipulate into disappearing, or write out of her own story without her knowledge or consent. She had reclaimed her voice, her truth, and her life, and whatever came next, she intended to build it entirely on her own terms, surrounded by people who valued her honestly, without hidden agendas or carefully rehearsed performances lurking beneath the surface. The crying had stopped, not because the pain had fully disappeared, but because Claire had finally understood the difference between tears that healed and tears that had only ever been used as weapons, and in that understanding, she found not just closure, but genuine, hard-earned peace. A full year passed before Claire allowed herself to think seriously about love again, and even then, it arrived quietly, without the frantic urgency that had characterized so much of her relationship with Daniel. She met Nathan through a mutual friend at a small gathering celebrating Diane's retirement from the marketing firm, a soft-spoken architect with an easy laugh and a habit of asking thoughtful questions rather than filling silences with empty conversation. Their relationship developed slowly, deliberately, built on the kind of patient honesty Claire had promised herself she would never again take for granted. She told Nathan about everything that had happened, not as a burden to unload, but as an honest part of who she had become, and he listened without judgment, without trying to rush past her caution or convince her to trust faster than felt natural. During this same year, Claire heard occasional updates about Daniel and Meredith through the loose network of mutual acquaintances that inevitably persists, even after the most painful breakups. Daniel, she learned, had moved to a different city entirely, taking a quieter position at a smaller company, seemingly attempting to rebuild a life far from the scandal that had followed him so publicly after the rehearsal dinner. Meredith, meanwhile, remained largely absent from their old social circle. Her attempts to reconnect with former friends consistently met with polite but firm distance, now that the truth of her pattern had become widely understood among the people who once trusted her completely. Claire felt no particular satisfaction in either outcome, only a distant, settled sense that consequences, however delayed, had eventually found their way to the people who had earned them. Her focus remained firmly on her own life, which continued to expand and deepen in ways she could never have predicted during those dark weeks immediately following her discovery. Sophie Whitmore had become one of her closest friends, the two women meeting regularly for dinner, supporting each other through the ongoing process of rebuilding trust after betrayal, celebrating each other's victories with a genuine warmth that Claire now recognized as entirely different from the performed sympathy Meredith had once offered so convincingly. Grace remained as steady and fiercely protective as ever, though their relationship had also grown in unexpected ways, the shared experience of that difficult month deepening a bond between the sisters that had always been strong but now felt truly unbreakable. Claire's career continued flourishing as well. The promotion Diane had championed had led to further opportunities, and within the year, Claire found herself leading an entire department, managing a team of talented people who respected her steady, thoughtful leadership style, unaware of the personal storm she had weathered before arriving in this position of quiet confidence and authority. One evening, Nearly 14 months after the rehearsal dinner that had changed everything, Claire sat across from Nathan at a small restaurant overlooking the same city skyline she had once watched from her old apartment balcony, feeling the weight of unshed tears from that painful period finally lifted entirely from her chest. Nathan reached across the table and took her hand gently, and Claire found herself smiling without hesitation, without the careful guardedness that had characterized so much of the past year. She thought, in that quiet moment, of everything she had learned since the day her world had shattered so completely. She had learned that love without honesty was simply a carefully constructed performance, indistinguishable from genuine affection, until circumstances forced the truth into the light. She had learned that patience and careful preparation could transform devastating heartbreak into empowered action, that gathering the truth methodically was its own form of strength, entirely different from, but equally valid as the more familiar strength of simply enduring pain. She had learned, most importantly, that her own voice mattered, that she deserved to control the narrative of her own life, rather than allowing others to quietly write her out of it for their own convenience. The woman who had once sat broken on her kitchen floor, staring at a cracked phone screen, could never have imagined the strength she would discover within herself over the following months, the network of genuine support that would carry her through the darkest days, or the quiet, hard-won peace that now filled the space where devastating betrayal had once threatened to consume everything she believed about her own life. As the evening deepened around her, the city lights beginning to glimmer softly against the darkening sky, Claire understood with complete certainty that she had not simply survived what happened to her. She had transformed it, methodically and deliberately, into something that had ultimately made her stronger, wiser, and more genuinely herself than she had ever been before the betrayal that once threatened to send her quietly into exile from her own life. She had refused that exile. She had chosen, instead, to stand fully in the truth, in front of everyone who mattered, and claim her own story completely. And in doing so, she had built something far more valuable than the life she had originally planned, a life rooted entirely in honesty, resilience, and the unshakable knowledge of exactly what she deserved from anyone she chose to let close to her heart. The crying had long since stopped. What remained now was something steadier, something earned through months of careful courage, rather than given freely and taken for granted. Claire raised her glass gently across the table, meeting Nathan's warm, patient gaze, and allowed herself, finally and completely, to look forward toward whatever came next with hope rather than fear. Her story was her own again, fully and entirely, and no one would ever quietly write her out of it again.